Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Kathryn Nicolai is the owner of Ethos Yoga in Holly, Michigan. She works to help students connect sensation and emotion in an empowering and productive way. She is also the creator of the podcast, Nothing Much Happens, Bedtime Stories for Grown-Ups. And her book of the same name is coming out worldwide in the fall of 2020. So Kathryn, welcome. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
I usually like to start these interviews by asking people, so how did you get into the work you're doing and what feeds your passion for this kind of work?
Oh boy, that's a good question. So the work I do is mostly around yoga. I got into yoga because I had an eating disorder. And I had a really serious eating disorder that began in my teens and made me really, really sick. And I used to work out so intensely that I was really harming myself quite a bit. And I remember that I was at the gym. This would be like maybe my freshman year of college. And I just couldn't take one more kickboxing class. My body wouldn't do it. But there was a yoga class in the basement of the gym. And I thought, okay, what's that? Like stretching? I can't do nothing, so I'll do that. And my first experience with yoga was that naturally, because of the shape of my bones, I have a ton of mobility in my body. And so from my very first experience, I was easily able to move into lots of crazy postures, and it just became a new addiction. And it was another way for me to try to perfect myself. And that carried on for a while until luckily I found a teacher who started to implant some ideas in my head about really caring for myself and loving myself. And that started to lead me onto the road of recovery. So that makes me really passionate about helping people to have a joyful way to move their bodies that isn't based on punishing them. And lots of practices around self-compassion and mindfulness and self-soothing that aren't destructive. So that still keeps me going now, 20 years later, to want to spread yoga. Because I find that even if people don't have the same background I do, we all kind of come with ideas about our bodies and the way that they should and shouldn't be. And everybody's got issues around that kind of stuff. Everybody deals with stress. Everybody deals with anxiety. So I feel like my greatest joy is to be able to help people find some peace and equanimity there.
Excellent. And I have to agree that especially in the culture we have, we are so inundated. We're bombarded with thoughts and images and systems of thought that have us compare ourselves to the ideal and compare ourselves to other people. And so one of my favorite teachers likes to say, the vast majority of your negative emotional states are the bitter fruit of a comparative life. You compare yourself to an ideal, you're going to be unhappy with the results. You compare yourself to other people and you'll bounce back and forth between thinking you're better than them and thinking you're worse than them. And it's an endless cycle.
It is, and it never really makes space for you to authentically be yourself or figure out who you are because you're always in comparison to someone else. And that's a life wasted. And,
right. And you
get
can't
a lot of meaning from figuring out who we are.
Yeah. And you can't then enjoy who you are.
Yeah.
Which, is most people are shocked to find out that that's possible basically for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So we're talking today because you were referred to me because you've got some of the specialty work that you do that comes from this, your own eating disorder, self-image issues, mental, emotional issues. So what have you done with that? How have you taken what a lot of people think of as just body exercise and really played up the mind-body connection in yoga?
Well, the way that I teach yoga, it's underpinned by a traditional Buddhist style of meditation called Vipassana. And Vipassana meditation, you might have heard about when people go and do like a 10-day silent meditation. Oftentimes that's Vipassana. So the lineage of yoga that I descend from all leans on the philosophy of Vipassana. And Vipassana is all about learning to be in the present moment with whatever's happening and training yourself to be calm and equanimous, to become less reactive, so that you can make better choices instead of knee-jerk reactions. And when I first started doing yoga teacher training with my teacher and practicing with him a lot, he was teaching from this philosophy, but I didn't really know that. I just knew it as the way that I thought all yoga was. And after I trained, he really encouraged me to go sit Vipassana. And I went and sat. I think my first long sit, I was maybe 22, so I was still new to yoga, more or less. And once I was there, hearing the teachings, sitting through the daily practices, I realized everything I was being taught was how I did yoga. And I was suddenly so grateful to have this experience of training myself to be in my body and at the same time really calm. Because we can understand a concept intellectually, but until we experience it in our own bodies, it often doesn't feel true to us. It's also usually not applicable for us. We have to actually put that idea into play and practice again and again and again. So when I teach yoga, we spend a lot of time basically just feeling sensations in our body. We want to know what we feel. Because we also want to know physiologically, are we hurting ourselves? Are we strengthening ourselves? Where are we in space? But also because of interoception, which can be like the body's spidey sense, right? For every emotion we experience, there is somewhere in our body a physical sensation that goes along with it. And when you understand those physical sensations and you get really good at listening to them, it's like an early warning system. I know when anxiety is coming. I know when my temper is rising. I know when these moments are happening because I can feel it in my tissues. And then I can say, hey, I have a plan for this. I've done this before. I was trained in my yoga practice to not run away from it. If it's a pleasant sensation, not to dig my nails into it. If it's unpleasant, to not push away, but to be with it, to know that it will pass, and to use my breath as a tool to stay calm. So to me, that is the heart of yoga. I often say to my students, it's not the postures. The postures are how we practice the yoga. The yoga is, how are you responding to this moment? Calmly, curiously, judgmentally, reactively. That's the yoga. And the body is just a way for us to practice it.
So the overlap between the work you do and the work I do in therapy is amazing. We often talk to people about how they've been trained to be cut off at the neck and to only think about what's going on. So if you're in school and you're not feeling so pleasant, whether you're just itching to get out and go run or your bladder's full, and you're trained from a very early age to just not pay attention to that. It's not time to go outside. It's not time to go to the bathroom. It's you're supposed to be sitting here paying attention. So whether it's intentional or not, most of our families and cultures train us to tune out awareness of those very physical sensations you were just alluding to. Mm-hmm. And if we can't help people begin to tune into them and then have an experience of them, it's really difficult helping people make progress.
It is. And we often describe it, like you were saying, dropping into the body, that you can get stuck in your head and lose connection with what's happening down here. And especially for people like me who struggle with eating disorders, we are often really tuned out of our hunger pains and our hunger cues. And we've lost a lot of our own intuition. And I think that happens to a lot of people. I always say to people, the first time you were forced to hug somebody that you didn't feel okay hugging when you were a little kid, you were taught to ignore your intuition. The first time you were told, in this family, we clean our plates, you were taught to ignore your intuition. And this is just whether it's something that directly comes at you or is just learned because it's the air we breathe, leaves a lot of us feeling numb. And sometimes going back into that awareness can create sort of a backdraft where it can be quite uncomfortable at first. I always say it's a bit like cleaning out the closet. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But it is sort of the only way that I know to really work toward healing. You have to be embodied.
Yeah, the only way out is through, and the good news is you can get through it.
Yes.
You know, it's odd to think that the very techniques we've been taught to use and the plan that we've been given for our lives is one of the most unproductive and long-term health problem inducing patterns you could have. It's, you know, some people believe that even the American Medical Association will tell you that more than 90% of all disease is stress related. Doesn't mean it's caused by stress, but it's going to be aggravated by stress or caused by stress or create other problems. And if you learn what you're proposing and you reconnect the conscious logical to this felt physical / emotional sensation pool, it gives you, as you said, so many early warning signs, so many places to intervene.
Yeah, it's empowering in that way because then you get an opportunity to retrain yourself. A lot of times in our early training, we didn't have any hand in that. We might not have picked the way that we got trained. So it can be quite empowering to then go, I'm going to unlearn that and I'm going to relearn myself. And then I can serve and soothe myself. And to what you were saying about stress contributing, I really believe that is such a big underlying condition for so many people. And I always point out that stress, you know, we know the ways that it physiologically harms the body, all these different ways that it can tear down the immune system and increase your blood pressure and all these things. But it also just turns us sometimes into jerks. And then our relationships struggle and our career doesn't go the way we want it to go. And we're not handling our kids very well. And so in this really basic way that unless we are finding these methods for establishing more equanimity and less reactivity, every part of the life suffers.
So where do you begin when people come with you? Come to you? Do you have like a particular subgroup of people who are most commonly coming to you asking for help with a physical or mental or emotional problem, or do they come to you because they want to do yoga? How do people get in touch with you?
Kind of all of the above. Sometimes people will have a very specific need, and sometimes what they really need is to first see a therapist. And so then I first refer them to a therapist and say, let's work together, but I can't be your therapist. I'm going to be your yoga teacher. And other times I just have people who have like a general desire to do yoga. They know that it's good for their health. They know that it's good to reduce their stress. You know, I can help people in all sorts of ways. At my studio, although we're currently closed because of COVID, we are still offering Zoom classes. And the most common style of yoga that I teach is a slow flowing style. And it's actually taught with eyes closed. It's taught to turn the gaze inside to feel those bodily sensations. And it's really for any body or any level of mobility. I can always figure things out for different folks depending on what their needs are. And then people sometimes stay with that style of yoga for their whole lives and then add in more intense styles or more restorative styles as needed.
So where do you get most of your referrals? How do people find out about you?
You know, I think I've been established at my studio for 14 years and word gets around. In the community I am in, there's not a lot of other yoga studios, but I often hear from people who say, my sister comes here, or my neighbor came here, or my friend came here, and I drove 40 minutes today because I heard I have to come to your class. And I'm so glad to be making create that kind of effect for my students. All of our teachers are trained in-house. So even though you're going to get a different voice and a slightly different approach, the underlying philosophy is consistent. So that really has gone a long way to us being able to serve people in a more effective way. Sometimes you go to a studio and it's sort of a collection of different philosophies. Everybody's got their own thing going on. And that can be groovy too, but I find for my students, they need to kind of have an idea that when they come to class, they're going to be walked through the process of how to breathe deeply. They're going to be walked through all this sort of emotional and philosophical ideas in a really easy to approach way.
So we were talking prior to the interview about the vagus nerve and the vasovagal response. Mm. Do you specifically talk to your clients about that? And how do you introduce them to that?
I do. And my students know that they're always going to get a strong dose of science whenever they come to yoga. They're probably going to hear some poetry. They're probably going to hear a nice story. They're probably going to have a good dose of science, because to me, that's the well-rounded approach. And it's also what interests me. And I often find that you're most authentic when you teach the thing that you want to learn. So I do talk a lot about brain science, about neuroplasticity, about basically how just moving our bodies is one of the best things we can do to prevent depression and anxiety. And one thing I have been teaching a lot lately is how to fire the vagus nerve, because it seems to be so connected to this parasympathetic response of the nervous system. And so I usually look for a way to explain it to people that they can wrap their heads around. Lately, I've been explaining it sort of that the vagus nerve is listening to how you breathe. And it's telling your brain what's going on based on your breath, whether you might need to run for it or fight somebody, or it's time to digest your food or rest or regenerate cells. So that's actually the class I taught this morning. We did a couple things to help stimulate the vagus nerve and just let people know that these are tools you can put in your toolbox. And later tonight, when you're struggling to fall asleep, pull one of these tools out. Or later you're about to go into a meeting and you're feeling your blood pressure come up. Right now, your vagus nerve is hearing you. And it's going to tell the neurotransmitters how to fire, what's going to get dumped into your system to correspond with that sensation. So the nice thing is that there are so many ways to fire the vagus nerve, and deep breathing does it. So a lot of times when we breathe in yoga, we spend a full 60 minutes with really deep breath. This is excellent for the nervous system. But also really simple techniques that you can employ where you're tapping or humming or singing. This is why chanting Om can actually trigger it. Creates a vibration in the throat. You've got those two vagus nerves that run down either side of the brain stem into the torso. So stuff that vibrates through here, and actually the way that we breathe in yoga creates a vibration in the throat, is all going to help that to fire.
So you mentioned tapping. Do you actually have them tap on the back of the neck?
Right at the corner of the jawbone. And today we started with a jaw stretch because a lot of people are gritting their teeth right now. And then since they'd already found that spot, we just did some tapping right behind the corner of the jaw on both sides. And it doesn't have to be harder for very long.
You do it alternately or at the same time?
One at a time, one side at a time. I think it wouldn't matter, though. You could do it either way. Even I think if you just did it on one side, it's still effective. But we did both sides, and then we did some tapping on the chest because that also helps it to fire. And that's something you could do quietly in your car and nobody would even know it, right? And I always kind of look for techniques that I can teach people that they could do while they're in the grocery store, when they're in public, but they feel like, oh boy, I need to get centered. I don't want to make a big deal of it. Here's some breathing techniques my teacher taught me. I can use them right now.
Well, that's one of the reasons I've enjoyed teaching the emotional freedom technique tapping for years. That, there's a few shortcuts that I teach people they can do when they're in the boardroom. They can do it when they're in checkout line at the store. No one's going to have any idea that they're giving themselves an acupressure treatment. Mm-hmm. And some of the places you're talking about, the upper chest and parts of the neck are areas that we encourage people to tap on with the emotional freedom technique tapping, all of that is tied with the breath, because just as you're talking about, there's a reason why practically every major spiritual tradition has breath work in it. There's a reason why Wim Hof is as successful as he is with a breathing technique to energize and strengthen the body. So after you introduce them to the vagus nerve, do you fly onto something else? Do you expand and tell them different ways that they might be aware that the vagus nerve is being stimulated or shutting down? What do you do with that?
My classes are always going to be blends of different ideas. So, I brought that up at the beginning of the class, gave them some time to work on it. Then we shifted into deep breathing, started to breathe what we call Ujjayi pranayama, which is a deep rhythmic breath. We start to move into postures. Usually what I do is I kind of plant a seed at the beginning, and then I'll come back and revisit it a few more times during the class. If you talk for too long on the same idea, people forget about their bodies, and they're there mostly to feel their bodies. But it was kind of opened the door for me to talk about the idea of, okay, if your vagus nerve is listening to you breathe, don't forget that your brain is also listening to everything that you say. So we talk a little bit about this idea of mantras in yoga, which we tend to maybe think of just being one word. But I always say, I bet you already have a mantra, and it goes like this: I'm so tired. I can't get anything done. I hate the way I look. There's already something that you are saying inside your head 100 times a day. So the good news is you already have a mantra practice. Now let's do something more useful to you. So that kind of opened the door for me to then just kind of talk about, don't forget that your body, your brain is listening to you and that you have an opportunity there to redirect yourself a little bit. And also just to notice if you're kind of rocking on the hobby horse, you're not going anywhere, but you're rocking on the same idea. And this is an opportunity to come to your breath, break that loop, and pick a more useful direction.
Excellent. It puts me in mind of the first part of Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul, where he talks about the absolutely ridiculous level of negative thoughts we allow ourselves to beat ourselves up with that we wouldn't tolerate from another person. But we've become so acclimated to it that, we think it's normal.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because just in class today, my mind must have followed the same pathway, because I just kind of remind them that the filter to check that voice in your head is, would you say it to a child? I was watching on my screen, my students, I saw somebody fall and I saw them get frustrated. And I just kind of could use that as a moment to say, if you're practicing with a child and they fell out of the posture and they looked at you to help them decide if they should be upset about it or laugh it off, you know what you would do. But often we don't show ourselves the same kind of compassion that we show to strangers.
Well, and it's not even that. We are just ruthless.
Yes.
Not too long before or after, I don't know exactly when it fell, but when I was reading or rereading the book, The Untethered Soul, they posted a video online where they went into a high-level women's clothing store, and they closed the store and they took all the tags off the clothes, and then they put special tags on them, and then they opened the store to their patrons, and they had video cameras going. And women, one at a time, would be looking at clothes, and they'd turn the tag over, and they would get violently angry. And then a store clerk would come over, and the patron would be furious about the insult that's written on this tag. And the store clerk would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's just what I say to myself when I look at that. Who do you think you are wearing something this is for young people, you're too old, this is going to make you look fat." And it was dynamic and powerful to watch that video as the women went from rage that someone would say that at them to them to tears, because they recognized that's exactly their own vicious self-talk.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that in your work in the yoga studio, it's not just therapists, it's now yoga instructors helping people break that cycle, because it's so important to break that cycle. I really like the idea that you've identified that they already have a mantra, right? You don't have to teach them how to have a mantra. You just have to give them better mantras.
Exactly. And again, I feel like that's a moment where you can be empowered, where you go, hey, I already know how to do this. And now I'm just going to do it in a smarter way that helps me. It's something I often say in class: when that voice in your head says terrible things about you, is there a person on the planet that has benefited by it? Is there a soul in the world who is helped by that? If not, I think you have to start to reroute, let it go, acknowledge that it's there, but remember also that you aren't your thoughts, that you are the presence that watches.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be able to recognize that when you choose to be results oriented, you can step back and you don't have to beat yourself up. You can just say, hey, do I like the results I'm getting when I do this? And if I like the results, I can do more of it. And if I don't like the results, I can try something new.
Yeah.
And one of the most powerful things is, as you're saying, when you imagine saying this to someone outside yourself, especially if it's someone that you care about, who's innocent, that you have great affection for. That's a wonderful litmus test for whether or not you should allow yourself to feed that same substance, poison, love to yourself or not.
Yeah.
So how long are the sessions that you have? Is it an hour session? Are they?
It's usually an hour. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer if we add a meditation to the end, but it's usually an hour. People sometimes come every day. Sometimes people come twice a day. Sometimes people come once a week. It all has to do with, like you said, is it benefiting me? Do I like the results I'm getting? Am I feeling better? That was a big part of how I was trained in yoga too, to honestly look and go, is this helping me? Don't just blindly follow something if it isn't helping. And I think sometimes in some traditions like yoga, people are discouraged from asking that question. And in the tradition I was taught in, it was always a vital question to say, is this helping? Am I feeling better? Maybe it's true for that person. Does it feel like it's true to me?
So there are so many things flying around. I'm recalling some of my favorite teachers. Guy Finley is one of them, and he talks about how when I resist what's being revealed, if I have something come up in me, it's really good information for me. But if I instantly assume that my thoughts about it are true and they're negative, I'm just going to hurt myself. I'm going to basically be beating myself up. And it's never true when it's negative. It's always a lesson for me about that negative filter I have learned from some time in the past and has now become active. I like to tell people that if I have a negative thought about myself or somebody else, or a negative emotion going on in my system, I can instantly know three things. The first thing is, it's a lie. It's based on a falsehood. The second thing is, it's an old tape playing. It's from the past. It's not about what's going on in this moment. Maybe it's what I heard the bullies tell me in school. Maybe it's what my angry parent would yell at me when I was incapable of meeting their demands. And the third thing is that if I act from that negative thought or negative emotion, I'm just going to make this situation worse. I can't possibly improve this moment by throwing negative emotions into it.
Yeah, that's so true. And being able to have that level of awareness in the moment and not necessarily reject the negative sensation or emotion, because they have things to teach us. But when you're not tied into believing them or reacting to them, then it can just be a piece of information. Something I often say in classes, this is information, it's not ammunition. We're finding out stuff about ourselves. And if we can let go of sort of the immediate knee-jerk reaction to, I like good and I don't like bad, then we're actually going to be able to learn and make better choices in the future. I think one thing I see happening a lot in yoga culture is people sort of getting on this good vibes only train, which I always think is dangerous. Negative emotions serve a purpose. And if we become so uncomfortable with discomfort, we're actually weakening ourselves. We're going to be more reactive and less able to soothe and calm. So when we move through the practice, whether there's sometimes physical discomfort, our muscles tight, a weak, we're shaky, we're tired, we're feeling hot or sweaty, or we feel that sudden spike of emotion. Sometimes you don't know where it comes from. Sometimes you know exactly where it comes from. But being able to just sit with it and go, okay, this is what that feels like. Wow, it's less scary now that I'm not running from it. I know that it will pass because everything does. And, oh yeah, I can breathe and use it as a tool to calm myself. That's so empowering. You really take the reins then.
Well, and that's exactly what I teach people, and we talk about in several other works I do. This thing we call, a body, a mind, is an energy system, and everything in it is there for a reason. So if everything's there for a reason, it'd be really good idea for me to know what the best use of all these things are. The positive emotions and the negative emotions, the negative physical sensations. And so I do very much what you're just talking about, encourage people to sit with, breathe into, and ask themselves about what they're experiencing as a negative emotion. Because there's really good information there. It's coming from inside me. It's the byproduct of a mechanism of thought or belief or energies that I've accumulated in my life. Pay attention.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily, Guy Finley would say it this way, when you realize that you can step back and watch the movement of your thoughts without having to be moved by those thoughts, then you've got something.
Absolutely. And that is, I feel like, the big benefit of having a regular mindfulness and meditation practice is that you train yourself to observe your thoughts, to be able to see them so that they're not just old programming running in the background that you aren't aware of, but also that it's not pulling you around. I always say it's kind of like pulling yourself onto the banks of a fast moving river. You're aware of the river, it's flowing by, but no longer are you being pulled around by it. You can observe it.
Excellent. So is there a particular type of therapist you refer people to? Are there certain therapists that you find you work better with in conjunction?
We actually have 2 therapists on staff at our yoga studio. And that was always part of our design from the time we opened. We knew that we wanted to treat as many people in the best way we could under one roof. And we felt like that required yoga and that it required therapists. So we have 2 on staff. But I know a couple others from the community, and sometimes they're people who I've met through yoga, but they usually tend to be interested in the same kind of work that we do in yoga, which sometimes could be called cognitive behavioral therapy. And sometimes those people will be the people that I refer to. It usually depends on the individual. They'll sort of come to me and say, sometimes I have people that say, well, I'm dealing with a substance abuse problem. I know somebody for that. Okay, it's not ours, but we know somebody. And we just try to keep this strong web of peers that we can refer people to.
So what kind of training did you want the people, the 2 therapists that are on staff with you, what kind of training did you want them to have? What kind of background?
I did want them to have a background in mindfulness and meditation and yoga, because obviously I wanted us to all be speaking the same language. They're people I've met organically, and actually our first therapist was my mother. And as I was going through yoga teacher training, she was getting her degree in counseling. And I remember having books in my bag from teacher training and pulling one out. And she said, I'm reading that right now for my counseling class. And I said, okay, I think we're on the same path here. And we kind of jokingly said, hey, if you ever want to open a business together. And finally I said, why are we joking? Let's do this. And we did. And for so many people, it seemed like such a good fit. And then we could add other modalities. We had acupuncture. We have other kinds of health coach and massage and stuff like that all work out of our facility.
Wonderful. Well, that's, the thing that several of the people we've had on the On Your Mind podcast have in common is the idea of a holistic approach, whether you want to call it holistic or integrative or functional medicine approach. And that sounds like what was happening in your training and your mother's.
Yeah.
That, she wasn't just getting the cognitive training. She was getting a nice, well-rounded, hey, you're dealing with a person who's got a mind and a body and an emotional system. And
yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite kind of person to work with? Does that work with personality, or does that work with the kinds of issues they're struggling with?
I mean, I always resonate on a personal level with people who've been through some of the same traumas that I've been through in my disorder. So I'm always kind of feel lucky to be able to work with people who might have eating disorders or body image issues to help them find some neutrality in their body and see their body as a wonderful, useful, loving machine. I like working with older people. I like helping people find mobility and realizing that you don't have to put your foot behind your head to be able to have yoga that's useful to you. In fact, that's such a tiny percentage. I sometimes say in class, there aren't that many problems that you could solve by getting your foot behind your head. You're not often going, gosh, if I could just stand on my hands right now. Right. That's not that useful. So I actually just really like working with people who might have limited mobility and finding a way for their body to move with a little bit more ease. I usually find the only people I can't work with are people who did not choose it for themselves. Really pretty frequently, a teacher or a student will contact me and say, I think my partner would benefit so much from yoga, but I think right now they're probably intimidated to come to class. Can you do a private class with them? No, I cannot. I did that for a couple of years. It took me a while to figure it out. If they don't choose it for themselves, they might do it for you for a little while, but they're not doing it for themselves, and it's just not going to stick. So that's usually the only people I feel like I can't work with. Everybody else, I'm always excited to learn something from a different age or different background, different level of mobility. I'm always excited by that.
So what's an aspect of your work or what you do at your studio that we haven't even touched on yet?
That would have you, sorry?
That we haven't even talked about yet. We haven't even tapped into yet.
A big aspect of it is community. And this is something I feel like my community is really missing right now, which is a feeling of interconnectedness with other people, of having this shared experience. It's something that we're kind of known for, is that we have a really strong, friendly community at Ethos. It's not cliquey, which is strange that you would think yoga would be, but it can be sometimes just a club for rich people. And we have this real strong position that our yoga is going to be the most affordable that we can possibly make it, and that everybody's welcome. And once you come in, we're your friends. Even if you don't know our name and we don't speak, I'm supporting you and I'm in your corner. And that's probably something that I know I miss right now, is being in the room with so many people who are working on the same stuff as me and breathing deeply and feeling connected and not alone. It's tricky through the screen. And I know that this will pass.
Are you doing any of it through platforms like Zoom or Google Hangouts?
I teach every day through Zoom. And that's really useful. And we're also looking for sort of things that we can do together, like book clubs and, talent shows and stuff where we can just see each other's faces. But it's something that we're missing right now. It's the big beating heart of my yoga studio, is just taking care of each other.
Yeah, I see a lot of that with people. We have a support group that's been running for a lot of years. And for the first, 16, it was in person on Tuesday nights. And now with the coronavirus restrictions, it's gone to the Zoom platform. And it's different, right? That people still appreciate the fact that we're willing to meet every Tuesday and have the platform, but people are really aching to get back in the same room with each other. And
yes, I miss that. I saw a picture posted the other day in the studio, and it was full of people closer together than we would ever be allowed to be now. And it just made me so heartsick for it. But I recognize that, this will pass, as all things do. And we're learning the lessons from it that we can learn.
Yeah, and as we were talking about earlier, when it stirs up a negative response in me, there's something for me to learn from that. There's a feedback mechanism that if I approach it from a questioning perspective, there's all kinds of good stuff I can learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why when I said earlier, are you coming at this with curiosity? That's exactly what we're talking about. Are you just sort of interested, curiously asking questions? What's this trying to tell me? What's that attached to? If I follow that line further down, what's at the bottom of it?
So how do people reach you most? Is it just ethosyoga.com?
It's actually ethos.yoga. So people do get in touch with us there. We're on all the social media platforms. I'd invite anybody who's listening to this, if you're interested in taking a class with me, you can go to ethos.yoga and see just how to do it. We have a yoga podcast as well with recorded classes. So there's lots of ways to get in touch.
Well, I greatly appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. And I hope that soon you're back in your studio, warm body to warm body, and able to enjoy that. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking to us. And I'm sure because we have some mutual friends, we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. This was a great conversation.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.